I wanted to have everybody share their opinions on one, sort of athlete evaluation in general. Like, how do we know that this person who, could be a quarterback in the NFL or a 400-meter runner for the Olympics, what are these indicators that we're looking at to determine whether or not they're going to be successful or, they're at the level that they need to be? So, and it gets very interesting in the theater aspect of it and the marketing and promotion and there's and as we found out, there's little industries around a lot of these things too. Like, there's people who rely heavily on being NFL combine prep people, and they might get offended if you say like the timing is bullshit, Justin. So I wanted to explore a lot of these different sort of issues around, why don't we just let them play the game? Why don't we just let them run the race and figure it out? I remember Kevin, I remember Charlie Francis telling me, like, everybody'd always come up to him and say, what's Ben Johnson's vertical jump? He's like, I don't care. Like, I'm looking at his 100-meter time or his 30-meter time, or, they didn't even know. And even he had told me Isaac Bruce didn't know what his 40 time was, even though he's one of the best receivers of all time. He didn't know what he could run in the 40. So he never had to, because he was a good player. So all these things are very interesting to me. And are we overdoing it? Are we overanalyzing things now and doing it for reasons outside of what's really necessary? So I'm going to get Justin to jump on first, because he's the one who broke the internet by showing people that, hey, the 40 times are actually bullshit. They're just manufactured. There's a hand time guy who, if you shove like $100 bill in his pocket, like, he'll start it a little later or something. I don't know how it works, but Justin, let's start off with you and your thoughts on just that specific example, the timing of the 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine. What's wrong?
I guess for me, it's just my track background. I know they say, hey, there's no like trigger, you're not going off a gun. But to me, I'm like, but football, you are going off of someone. You're going off the ball, snap of the ball, or you're going off the defender. Yeah. So to me, I mean, if you're going to pay all these athletes a lot of money, to me, I'm like, again, I don't know anything, but why would I invest so much on the 40 when it's not even accurate in the first place? Like, I would want accurate data. Give me the accurate. And that's why, to me, it's like, hey, go run the 100. Let's find out what your true speed is. But again, it's like, right, the best of the best, like Mahomes, he was slow as dirt for the 40, but he's got a Super Bowl ring, And so for me, I think it's just one, if you're going off the hands, why not go off the rear foot? Even with Zybex, they say it's the laser, the little hand that triggers, there on the ground. And, when I know chronometer is not 100% accurate either, but I'm like, there's an error in that in itself, and then if you're going manual start, there's definitely bias. It's like, how do you not know that person's on point and favoring something else, or, so to me, I'm like, just get rid of it all and just go off of fully electronic. But again, that's going to throw out the whole, 20 plus years of 40 times that they got, so that's just, and then I think it's just, it doesn't help either when you have these times. It's like, I did this the other day. There's a kid here in the area, in the Fort Worth area, that, said he ran a 4.4. And I was like, you did not run a 4.4. And they use the free lap system, and they didn't even have the free lap system set up correctly. And I'm like, so I think it's just, to me, it just trickles down. For me, is the bigger issue. It's like, if you're not doing it right in the NFL, well, when it comes to the high school, level and stuff, like, let's standardize the timing, make sure it's 100% right instead of just whatever it is.
Well, that begs the question. Yeah, thanks for that, Justin. That'll get us started off here. That begs the question of whether or not that test is even valid for, like you said, football success. Should there be sort of like zones that you have to be in to, that people want to evaluate in? Because if I look back at all the top players, I can't remember what Travis Kelce ran in the 40. Tyreek Hill, obviously I'm biased towards one team here, but some of the best, but Tom Brady, what did he run? 5 something, so it doesn't seem to be an indicator for success at any position. So I just find it kind of interesting. Kevin, can I get you to jump in next? And just in terms of like your track and field background and what you've seen, looking at the NFL and going, are you having the same reaction? Like, what are these guys doing?
So actually, Jimson would know because Jimson's helping me out with this, but I'm writing our 400-meter course right now. So part of my interest in sitting on this is to learn from you guys regards to testing and what you think the relationship is, right? And tests that have been used. Couple interesting facts. I think I was probably months away from Tyreek Hill coming to OU. Apparently it was between OU and OSU, but they fired the sprint coach that summer and he wanted to run track. So he went to OSU because Diego was there and they had a track program. And they didn't have a history of letting the football guys run track at OU. So then I came on in August. So that was his freshman year. But yeah, and that guy could roll just up the road. Yeah, I mean, I guess like I used to bobsleigh as well, right? So that test was applicable to what we were doing. I ran 419 and spikes on a track through photocells at altitude in Calgary. And, so there's a lot of variation there. There's a lot of variability there, just, right off the top, just based on a series of conditions. My question actually for Justin is, is there a reason to believe that there was any variance this year compared to previous years, or is there just that much variability in the results because of the setup? They were running.
Yeah, I think it's a variability of the setups.
Yeah, because I remember when it was they were running a pro day at OU probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and it looked like, I mean, they had a guy out there that knew what he was doing, and they were trying to bring, but then I guess the issue there is they don't all run off the same parameters at each pro day, or not, which is a whole different ball game. I mean, from our perspective, from a track and field perspective, like you'll find quite a bit of variability between coaches depending upon where they're moving on back foot movement. And you just kind of have to figure that out for yourself. I know for myself, I'm about 0.55 out. So anything I time on the watch, I'm probably going to add about half a second to get their fully electronic time.
But at least you go to a competition and that there's a standard around how the timing is done for that. Like,
yeah, I mean, as you know, like every track field meet set up with the same, same standard of equipment. And so generally there isn't an issue. And then there's backup cameras on top of the primary camera. So even if there's a failure, they're going to pick up the backup time.
Yeah, and I think that's the same thing, like, right, with all these players that go to these, combine, get ready. It's like, people sound like, oh, they came in at this time. Well, if the Zybex is going to be the standard tool of test, then guess what? If I'm an agent, I want every single facility to have the same thing and make sure it's being ran and set up the exact same way at the combine. So that way you truly have an indicator of, okay, this is what they really truly came in, but also know that that's the business side, right? Like, so, that's just another thing to me. I'm like, oh, that kid came in, ran this before we worked for 12 weeks, and now they did this at the combine. Okay, well, what method did you use for testing? Was it the power? Was it chronometer? Or what? I mean, was it free lap? Like, I think those are important things to, consider too. It's like, I think it's just like, it's got to be a standardized like testing, when it comes to talking millions of dollars of drafting kids.
Yeah. So let's bring somebody else in. Jim Malone. I'm curious to get your thoughts as just somebody who's worked in different sports as well at the professional level, because again, I kind of, they have these events, and I know the NFL Combine is useful more for other reasons, not the testing, but it's useful for medicals. It's useful for staff from each team getting together, and the athletic trainers getting together, and the strength coaches, even though they vote strength coach of the year based on no measurable whatsoever. It's kind of like a popularity contest, or like, oh, he's been around for a while, let's vote him in. So there's all these sort of weird things going on, but certainly it's a chance to meet and get some other things done. So are we overemphasizing the validity or value of the tests, and maybe, hey, it's just a chance for us to get together, Jim?
Well, just so everybody knows my background, I've never been in the I've never been to the NFL Combine. So because my experience in football is college, aside from one camp with the Browns, and To your point, yeah. I mean, we started combine events last year with MLB, right? And we're in the infancy stages of figuring out what's right and what's practical. If I'm looking at the NFL, obviously I have been around for 30 plus years and enough friends in the NFL, and I know what goes on there. You've got so many people that are involved in the event itself that everybody's got a different why that they're there. If you are sort of a small school guy and you get a chance to go there and then maybe get a chance to show off your physical attributes, it's going to change. It's going to change where you're at. And the example for me is Marcellus Wiley, because I was at Columbia when Marcellus played at Columbia. He went to Mike Boyle and trained for the combine, and he went there and turned himself in from a dominant Ivy League player into a second round draft pick, like the 49th or 50th guy chosen overall, coming out of Columbia University. So, I think it is a chance for those as an athlete to go showcase yourself. And, at least they've got so many years of data to just sort of compare yourself. Now, we've also seen plenty of combine guys that have sucked and been Hall of Fame guys. And we've had guys that have been combine supermen that were washouts in the league. So in the end, game tape and gameplay are going to tell you, just like it does in baseball. I think in baseball more than ever. I think the combine is, I think it's an effort for us to standardize some things. And I think that the screen and the medical stuff is far and away more important than what we're really finding out from the strength conditioning side of it, because that pool of draft eligible kids is enormous compared to the NFL. And it's the one kid every 3 years that goes from the MLB draft and is actually playing a meaningful game before that September is up. So, we still don't know everything that we're learning by having these guys even show up to that. I mean, we did the 60 last year, and that's almost useless, but we did get a 10, 20, 30-yard split. So, odds are we're not going to do the 60 this year, and it'll just be a 30 with those splits. But even that, in baseball, they're not static starts and straightaway speed. It's, again, it's just number. I think if anything, it just tells you a kid's actually puts forth some effort into their physical preparedness.
Yeah, I mean, I know I get people contacting me about their kid running a 60 time for baseball, and that's all their and all their scouts have told, or all the camp people or whoever their mentor is has told them, you need to get better at this so that you can move on in your baseball career. And that seems, it's interesting. I think it seems like a little short-sighted. Like, I don't know how everything else is going in their baseball preparation, but they're really focusing on that one time.
Yeah, I think that's going to change. I mean, it's got to come backwards from what the scouts and the front offices are looking at. But that's been the standard for decades. So until the meter moves in that respect, it's not going to change. I think it's close to not being relevant anymore. It's just got to come from really the decision makers more than it comes from us. I think that we all offer our opinions and basically say that this is not telling us anything, because you're running the bases, you're getting almost zero linear speed whatsoever, unless you're tagging up at third on a fly ball. And even then, you've got a potential outcome at the end of that being different. Are you sliding? Are you avoiding a tag? Are you jumping over a guy? I mean, it's never a straightaway 30-yard sprint. And then, it doesn't even happen it doesn't happen anywhere else, outfield, infield. So 60 yards is pointless.
Does anybody else want to comment on the NFL Combine? Because I think there's this deeper dive in terms of, one, testing itself, but also the kinds of tests that might be useful. And I think that's what we ultimately want to get into. Any other comments on the NFL Combine?
We shouldn't also forget that the day of the combine, or the day of any competition, I mean, I remember Andy Higgins saying this to me a long time ago. You also got to see how motivated that person is on that day. They are the best on that day alone. If they were to try to do the same thing the next day, they may not even get those numbers.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many variables, obviously.
Exactly.
Can they reproduce that? Because I'm sure some people run that 40 time and then they just detrain and never come close to that for the rest of their career. So, but let's talk about the tests themselves and the reason for testing. And I know Jim brought up a good point about maybe it's just like an indicator of like, hey, have you trained? Are you taking this seriously? Rob, what do you think about that, just in terms of having tests throughout, whether it's a training program, your strength and conditioning program? Some of it is indicators of like where you're at, but is some of it to create a goal for people to shoot for so that they have some enthusiasm through that training program? And do they have a good work ethic?
Yeah, I look at this in two different scenarios. One is if you're a high school kid that's trying to get a college scholarship, or if you're a college player who's trying to get drafted in the NFL, then your selection is going to be based on these tests that are specific metrics by which the coaches are going to go by. So you're kind of forced into that thing, whether you believe it or not, right? What's your 40 time, what's your vertical jump? Like the bench press exercise. I mean, the reason why the strength exercise, to my understanding, is the bench press is not everybody squats, not everybody presses, not everybody Olympic lifts, but everybody pretty much bench press. So that was the reason why they selected the bench press. What that has to do with football, who knows? But if you do well in the bench press, it helps your standard to get drafted at a higher level or maybe get a college scholarship. So you've got to meet the metrics to be considered, right? Because that's what the organizations are going by. I don't combine tests or combine train people, but years ago when I used to work the off seasons with the Giants, the general manager was a guy named George Young. And George Young used to say that the combine was an opportunity to devalue your position in the draft, because he went off game film. And Al Vermeil will tell you the number one test that no one talks about is, can you play? And that's the bottom line, so we look at the Brady's or the other people, maybe they didn't do well in the combine, but they wound up being very good players. What I'd like to know is, if you did a 20-year history of the combine, what percentage of the players who scored well wound up being good players? So now you have a subset saying, we know that X percent of players in this combine, regardless how they score now, are going to wind up being good players. And then of those people, what were the test scores that predominantly they did well at? So at least you have maybe more of a focus with regards to, in the small subset, these people did well on this test, so maybe we've got a chance of getting a good player. But the bottom line to me is can they play? Because times and vertical jumps and reps in a bench press doesn't mean you can play. But you need those standards to be drafted or given a scholarship, right? So it's kind of, I look at it in two different ways.
In a college or high school setting, is it useful to test, like, say, a 1 rep maximum? Well, obviously as an indicator, but I know you've also presented on these concepts of rehabilitation and knowing where somebody was before they got injured. Is there value in having those standards or those indicators so that,
yeah, I mean, you have to know what somebody was before they were injured, because you're trying to meet that metric post-injury, right? But there's a lot of things that occur after injury, right? Like you could have kinesiophobia or fear of getting hurt again. So no matter how fast they are, or if they're still able to throw 90 plus miles an hour, if they're afraid to play, that's a factor that was there presently that wasn't there before the injury. So again, that's where I go back to. We need certain standards to meet again, because we know what the athlete was, and maybe if we do a good job, they could surpass that. But again, I'll back up a second. So we run outcomes. We have an independent company that evaluates our ability to rehab people. All right. And so we rehab people based on national and regional and local standards, based on efficiency, meaning the time to get them better, and the effectiveness. How good are they at the time they return to whatever? Those things are about restoration of an injury and metrics of function. It doesn't mean they can play. We assume that if they meet those standards, they're going to be able to play. But, like I said, if it's an ACL, psychologically, are they afraid to plant on that leg? Even though they could run linearly at high velocity, can they change direction like they used to? All those types of things. So again, I'm going full circle. I think you need to meet these standards, because that's where your payday is. That's what you're being judged on. But these tests don't mean you can play. And I'd much rather go back to what were your films for the season and what was your consistency game in, game out. I think that's more valuable. That's just my opinion.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I was working with a German professional soccer team, and they had an ACL case. They had some other injuries, Achilles, and they had standards in place for insurance companies so that if you're a professional athlete, you have to test in this, this, and this to show that you're successfully have gone through your rehab, and that, you know, and I think the funding was based on it. The insurance funding was based on them meeting different indicators through their rehab. And then if you're a carpenter, they have another test. If you're I don't know, like a computer guy, maybe there's another, you know, fine motor skill test or something like that. But it was very interesting how, I mean, it's Germany, right? So they're very precise on everything. But is there anything like that? You know, I mean, you kind of mentioned that.
Listen, ACL return to play, the statistics are less than stellar. I mean, we've got to get better at that. You know, we really do. And, you know, there's a lot of factors probably why we're not optimally returning as many people to play as we want to. Same thing with, you know, sometimes with throwing velocities, et cetera. And that's what I mean. It comes down to there are things called limb symmetry indexes, which you compare the non-involved or the non-injured to the injured side. And, you know, that's fine. But the bottom line is standards of the game. And as I said before, the number one test nobody speaks about is, can you play? And, you know, you've got to meet the standards of the game, which is different than meeting your opposite limb, because that's what you meet every day in practice with your peers. And that's especially what you meet on game day competition. And, you know, one of those factors is, okay, I have all these physical qualities. I can jump, I can run, I could throw, I could catch, I could hit. Can I do during competition? And how effectively and efficiently am I during competition? You know,
let's jump to the track and field example for Kevin, Jimson, and obviously Justin. But in track and field, it's a little different because you could run subsets of your event. So you could run a 30, a 60, and then you could have an indicator of maybe what you'd run in the 100 if you're a 400-meter runner, your 100, your 200, your 150, your 300. And those aren't necessarily tests. Now, I'll get Kevin to jump in again. What other tests would you do aside from making them run shorter distances or long, or whatever to indicate to you what they would run in the full event? Is there anything else you would do to test to say, like, yes, this guy's going to run 44 seconds in the 400 aside from those other distances?
Yeah. So I had to laugh because, you know, like, probably like you, I mean, Charlie's voice rings through my head on all of this stuff, right? And, you know, to Rob's point, I think there's a good reason why Charlie and Al were good friends, because you know what Charlie's answer would be to this question is, like, if you can't tell from all that game film who's going to be a good player, then you're not a coach. You know, like, I don't care about all this other stuff, right? You know, because we talk about there's a difference between, you know, straight velocity, straight track speed and game speed, right? And how it's utilized, right? And to your point, to the guy's point, and we did a lot of work with the Diamondbacks, the whole franchise, from rookies to the pros. And, you know, the only thing I could say possibly that having some kind of sprint test in their combine would benefit them is because everyone's slowly ramping up their knowledge, but there's very little awareness about sound sprint technique, you know, or sound acceleration technique, right? And so you kind of have this situation, particularly in baseball, because they're all constantly in this flex position, right? Where you either have this kind of technical fault that can be corrected. They just don't have the knowledge. There's never been the input. Or you have this mechanical aberration that's like really difficult to work around. This can take a lot of time. You're gonna have to work closely with a therapist, strength and conditioning coach to get there. And I think that there's a tendency these things aren't addressed because they don't necessarily connect the dots to what kind of movement patterns are required to be able to sprint or accelerate really well. So maybe it creates a little bit of awareness around that. But to your point, I mean, that's what I'm doing right now. So, you know, Laurent Muley, he coaches 2 or 3 of the best female 400 runners in Europe right now. He did a really good presentation to us. And he's using all these different metrics to try and determine whether, like on that long sprint side, whether someone's like really a sprint type long sprinter or what he calls a diesel type long sprinter, which is someone that can hit a fairly high velocity, but their speed endurance is good and they can hold it for a long time. Well, there isn't any one metric out of about his 10 metrics that I would say that's the one. But like, I'll use an example, like on the 30-second wind gate test, for example. Retrospectively, when you look at the girls that are scoring well with peak power, you would guess those are the sprinters, and they are the sprinters, right? And when you look at, fatigue index or average power, then the diesel types kind of come on, right? And they're stronger throughout the entire 30 seconds, or, so they have a lower fatigue index. But I was talking to Gareth Sanford, he's done a lot of work in this area, especially around the 800 meters, because there's still an interesting interplay between aerobic and anaerobic going on, because with anaerobic, it's a complete, can't measure anything, right? In terms of force expression, it's very difficult, right? So from an aerobic contribution, looking at the 800 meters, and, he was talking about when he was working in the Premier League, because I think he worked with the English FA part of the European Championships when they made the final. And they're starting to look at this, like, how do they do locomotive profiling around different athletes? Because they're starting to realize, like, the Raheem Sterlings of the world are going to get busted in basically a, tempo-based European football strength conditioning program, right? But he said that when he first started working with them, when he had the coaches, actually this was with cricket, when he had the coaches basically score the athletes, they were almost as good, just going off of certain key elements, just making an assessment as the tests were, right? So, and he said probably a little bit more accurate. And so that's the thing, right? It's like, so to answer, I'm not sure if that was a good answer to your question, but it's just like, ultimately, like, I think Dr. Bondarchuk has kind of said, the best test for 400 meters is 399 meters, and somebody texted me a while ago and they're like, oh yeah, Bud Winter, 320-yard test. But like, in certain populations, yes, but the degree of variability across these populations that are all running world-class performances is super high. And I sent a text out on our discussion group today. Don't want to ramble on too much about the 400, but the point is still valid here, is that I have a girl here that's run 48.7 on a 200 plus 200 off of 45 seconds rest. And I'm asking everybody, what do you think she would run? And it's not necessarily what you think it is. Some athletes will run really close to that time, and some just recover really quickly in 45 seconds. When the actual race comes together and they have to string those two components together, they're not quite as good.
But there was no, like, this person had a great vertical jump or could power clean this. You would never pull from that data, these isolated.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, there's one, I'm sorry, I keep referring to the 400 because that's actually what I'm really looking into right now. But
yeah,
there was one study done about 17 years ago. They looked at counter movement jump, 30-second counter movement jump, and 15-second reactive strength jump, like stiff-legged jump, right? Now, I would think, my experience tells me that reactive strength is going to score high because a lot of really good 400 runners have really good elastic strength. But that was the one variable that they said did not correlate to performance. The ones that correlated to performance were actually the counter movement jump and counter movement jump for 30 seconds, particularly the last 15 seconds of the 30 seconds, because that's where the gap grew between the ones that were really good and the ones that were not as good.
Wow.
And they were all a fairly high level, college entry to high performance type cohort. So, and then we had a living lab going for a while here, and we were doing a lot of testing, and we got force, but we have all the equipment. And to be honest, it was a lot of time and energy. And at the end of the day, we kind of bailed on it because our opinion was it wasn't really informing our programming. And to me, if it didn't make a difference in how we programmed or our ability to predict injury, say, then it was like, why are we doing this? Now, it could just be we're not smart enough, which could be the case. Definitely put a hand up there. But yeah, I think that experience is what, it's not great. That's not what people want to hear. But I'll tell you, I was in the gym. You talk about people that work with combine. I was in the gym down here. So everyone knows we're in Atlanta now. And so high school football is huge here. It was an 8th grade kid training there. He's the #1 player in the state right now for his class. And he walked in here with a film crew. And then this morning, so he had his own film crew while he was doing this session, 8th grade. And this morning I open up, one of the sport business newsletters, and I see that they're reporting on some kid that's just signed in. He's been offered an $8 million NIL. So you talk about all the noise around this stuff and why it's pertinent. It's like this kid has a chance to actually make $8 million before he's a junior, in his junior year. And the Georgia quarterback's coming back for his last year here because he could probably make more money in his 4th year, his last year of college, than he can go into the NFL on minimum wage. If anyone wants to be in sports business, start an NIL consortium and line yourself up with one of the big schools.
Yeah, get this is all NILs and NFTs now, right? Jeez.
That NIL thing is going to change everything. Like I saw this from a mile. Like I'm sure that anyone that was in the know knew this was going to happen. This is completely a recruiting. If you can't, I don't know if you remember Caleb Williams was transferred from OU, Michigan, some small school in Eastern Michigan, just straight up came out and said, "We'll give you $1 million straight up if you come out here," and they probably underbid him. You know, like he probably got a lot more to go to where. Did he go to SC? I think he went to SC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody cares, but Tom Brady's going back to Tampa Bay for his 23rd season. It was just announced.
Really?
And that's why the combine doesn't matter.
He just watched Ronaldo get a hat trick yesterday in Manchester because he was in the crowd.
Oh my goodness. Why are we even talking about testing, Jim Malone? Jeez.
Well, that's, I mean, again, and in baseball, I think at least again, because my experience is baseball and football, but I've said it before, and I've talked to kids about it. I've given, some of the times I've been asked to speak. Baseball, if you got the skill, you're going to play. It doesn't matter. Like all your physical attributes, because it is so, in my opinion, so uniquely specific that I can't tell you how many guys have been terrible athletes, but they're good baseball players. And that's if you can put, I mean, we can argue about what one of the hardest things in baseball or the hardest things in sports to do, but I would have to say that it'd be hard to argue that hitting a baseball isn't at least in the top 3.
So Jim, let me ask you this. Why isn't it, let's play one to 100 players. Why isn't it batting average, stolen bases, errors made, et cetera, like performance variables versus, 60-yard dash, this vertical jump? Why isn't it just the variables of the game? Why aren't they just judged on that?
Well, they do. I mean, they do. Look, 20 years ago, baseball, I wouldn't be on this call. Nobody, because they didn't care about that stuff then. 20 years. I got into baseball in 1997 on a goof. And it was, it was just, I mean, and it's too bad Bobby's not on here, obviously, because he got in a few years sooner than me. And he had a much broader collegiate coaching experience than I did, because I was a position coach in football who did strength conditioning. So it's not even like I was working with a lot of other sports strength conditioning wise. All I was doing was helping either doing it myself as a outside linebacker coach and strength coach for Princeton, or I was, working with the O-line and tight ends and then helping in the weight room at Columbia, where we actually had a strength coach. But, I mean, that was the days when everything was, 2 sets of 12 and manual resistance and bands. I mean, don't put a bar, God forbid you put a bar on someone's back. That didn't matter. I mean, when you've got someone like A-Rod playing the same position as David Eckstein, I mean, you can't, it's harder, you're not going to find a much broader physical spectrum of two guys that play in the same position, or Tim Lincecum, doing the same thing as, playing the same position as Randy Johnson and having similar results. It just ends up being, sort of who's got enough bullets, or, durability wise, whatever all the other factors that come into play, just the longevity of it. And, pitchers, they talk about the number of bullets. And, why didn't Lincecum have a 15-year career? Was it because he didn't train hard enough? No, probably not, because at 5'9" or whatever he was, which is pretty close to that ballpark, and 165, 170 pounds, he just, he just ran out of bullets. There's no amount of training was ever going to change that. It's just, the intricacy of his physiological makeup just wasn't going to allow him to pitch with that same type of intensity to go any further than he did. Whether or not he was a dope smoker, or, liked to work out or didn't like to work, it didn't matter. And then you got Nolan Ryan, who, could have been wrestling cattle if there was no such thing as baseball. And then he just had the physical durability, and he enhanced it because he embraced strength training. Even if he hadn't, he probably would have pitched almost as long with the same amount of success.
Because I'm listening
the other side of this spectrum.
I'm listening to you guys talk, and I have my kids, and they're in different sports. My son's in football, my daughter's in basketball, and I take them out and we go and run and jump and do all these. And I'm thinking maybe they should just work on their sport. maybe I'm wasting my time. But anyways, Jimson, I want you to jump in. You've collected a lot of data on performance, outcomes for different athletes in track and field. I mean, do you ever, like, I'm looking at the Tyreek Hill taunting Usain Bolt, like, hey, let's race. He doesn't care. He's going to make $100 million next year or whatever in the next couple of years. He's just doing this for fun. He doesn't want to actually run track. That would be ridiculous.
Yeah, we're obviously overthinking a lot of this, and I mentioned in the comments, like for Bud Winter, the closest race to a quarter mile was a fifth of a mile. That's why he did the 352-yard test. It was exactly 1/5 of a mile. So if you ask me to choose a 100-meter, sprinter, my estimates would be, okay, what's his 60 time? What's his 150 time? It's not that hard, right? 400-meter runner. What's his 200-meter time or 100-meter time? So I think we're really overlooking things. But what I think is different is there's a good post by a chap by Gianluca is about the 6 things to look for. Now that is what I look at, and I change my program according to their qualities. I've seen guys with big bench presses and very poor reactive power, like very poor standing long jump, and they can't even power clean for shit. I've seen other guys, wiry, skinny guys, really elastic, 11 feet standing long jump, but they can't even bench 135 pounds or 60 kilos or 100, So it all depends on the quality of the athlete and how you train them differently. But at the end of the day, it's what are you trying to do? You're trying to play football? Okay, let's play them football, get them on the sport more. And I think that's what it is, really. There's a fine balance between everything, but I really think we're overlooking things, or we're overthinking things half the time. You just got to play your sport. And I think with football, there's a bit more skill than track, I think. I mean, I'm not knocking down track guys, but football, there's a bit of skill involved. And baseball, I play baseball. There's a lot of skill in baseball over, in track. So, yeah, it's about your sport and just doing more of it. That's all. That's my opinion.
It's hard to evaluate nuance, especially at the highest level.
Yeah,
there's so many things. Intelligence. You could be, you may not be school smart, but if you've got a high sport IQ, whatever your chosen sport is, along with obviously the correct physical attributes, then you're going to be, you're going to be successful. And if you've got, if it's not 50-50, one might make up for the other, but it's probably not going to help your longevity, because how many, again, for me, reference in baseball, how many kids were drafted that, could throw even 20 years ago that were throwing 95 miles an hour coming out of high school and couldn't get out of A ball. So it's
because I look at and even Kevin can jump in on this. DK Metcalf wants to make the Olympics in the 100, which I think is no, don't do that. And then Tyreek Hill, if you had Tyreek Hill as a track athlete, he said, Kevin, I've had enough of this football. I'm going to train with you. I'm going to run the 100 or 200. What would you do with him? How would you train him? Like, because certainly there's things that make him a better football player that might, maybe a higher stride frequency, low hip position that makes him a better football player. But if you transition him to the track, do you change those qualities?
Yeah, I'd be like you. I'd advise him not to. I mean, if you look at the top 3 American guys right now, and like Coleman, Baker, and what's his name, Brumell. Like, I mean, we're talking there's 3 9.8 or faster guys. Like, so already that's the team. You're hoping that somebody gets injured. So, sorry. Before I answer that, I was going to make a point earlier too. Is that actually what's interesting, because this just kind of builds on what Jimson was saying. I think like Jimson's correct there. It's like, that's kind of what Garrett's message was to me, was like, okay, you have all these different metrics and you can use them to kind of make assessments around where the strengths are and potentially where I'm not going to say weaknesses, I'm going to say opportunities, where the opportunities are. And you have to kind of make a decision as to what other attribute that you think might support their strengths that you're going to pursue, and kind of keep that, like, like Charlie talked about vertical integration, and you're going to keep that kind of there. It's not going to be a primary quality, but you're going to continue to work on it, type thing, right? And so, like, if you think about even different types of track people, the one thing the combine doesn't do is that, like, you're doing one 40-yard test, right? But that's not the game. right? Who gets to go in for one play and then get full recovery? It's like, the ability. So how do you could have someone who's maybe 500ths to a tenth of a second slower, but they're able to repeat it multiple times in a very short period of time. Right? And that could be a very different attribute. And that might actually be more valuable to a team, especially late in the game, right? Where someone's still got breakaway speed late in the game because, they've got some kind of, enduring qualities there. So, but I mean, as far as like, I think we're going to, you're going to assume, okay. Cause so when I was at Oklahoma, Coach Stoops actually allowed 3 guys to come and run track. They were all kind of tier 2 guys. So it wasn't a big risk, but, Coach Smitty basically told them that, look, these guys know what they're doing. It wouldn't be a bad thing. They're not going to hurt them. It's going to work on acceleration and teach them some technical things. The biggest issue was just body weight. And Sean Mishka's come and talked at our place quite a bit. And what I kind of found interesting was when I was at Oklahoma, what you see with football guys, it's, you're taking a 10-4 kid from Texas that's run the 100 meters at a high school level, and you got to get him over 200 pounds if he's a receiver, and you got to get him to over 220 if he's a back. And, so these guys would get really rigid, so that would affect their ability to run past, 10 meters, never mind 40 yards. But then when Sean would come and talk to us, about what the NFL is looking for, they're looking for speed, and they're looking for agility, they're looking for movement. And, a lot of these kids didn't have that, but just, they had lost that. The 10-4 kid couldn't break 11 seconds. And I know that because he ran lead off on our 4x1 at Texas Relays because it's the only place I could put him. Basically the shortest leg, maximize acceleration qualities. It was great to 60 and he just got smoked after that. Yeah, so unpeeling that process of them having been in football with all probably this, weight gain and strength gains and mobility issues that come with the injuries, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
But as Jimson said, look at their acceleration, look at their 60, see if there's any kind of mechanical aberrations that you can address that'll kind of protect them, protect them, make them a little more robust, no one likes that word, but a little bit more, so they can kind of withstand some of the training volumes of sprinting and then kind of start to assess the opportunities for speed endurance work and how you can get some maintenance values there.
I think too, isn't it, like on the whole testing stuff? Because like when I was at TCU, like I guess DA like shocked me in a sense because he wasn't really crazy technical in a lot of things, and he just looked at times like, hey, this if you can do this for a fly 60, probably going to do this, in the 60, and possibly, hey, if you run this, you're probably going to do this in the 100. And there was nothing fancy with this stuff. And more I've been in, I sort of wonder, like, especially like, right, even strength and conditions, like we got to put numbers onto something to make us say, hey, we're doing something right. Look, they're progressing. But then when it comes to the actual game stuff, how do you really evaluate playing the game? And like take that to the next person, like, hey, this is why this person's going to be good. So I think we fall back on, well, the vertical, this or that, like, so therefore they're going to be good. Then you look at film or, things like that, or even like a sprinter and stuff, you see certain qualities like, okay, and you're like, yeah, but their times don't show it. It's like, that's great. You have a great vertical and squat. I mean, shoot, I always use myself as a great example. 41-inch vertical, 500 squat, 345 for clean. Couldn't run under 13.9 to save my life. But football coaches were like, ooh, come play football. And so I think that's where it's like, to me, it's like when it comes to all the testing, it's great. The data's great, but I think it's just that way to make a lot of people feel good. Like, well, hey, but they can play because we got all this data. But then they go on the field and it's totally different. Like Kobe listening to me when we were at, I think, Kevin, I think you were there when Kobe was at TCU, right? Listening to me, number 7.
Yeah.
And we were trying to tell him like all the time, like, dude, you don't need to go to the combine. Like, if you come out your junior and run under 10 flat, it's done. But yet everything like, oh, but I got to do this. And same thing with strength coach to the other coaches, like, you got to go to the combine. If you don't go to the combine.
Yeah, he was at Exos. Yeah, I saw him at Exos. He did his combine prep at Exos. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was in trouble because football coach said no, let's keep playing. So he had issues and injury, and they did stuff and basically ruined his chances. Basically, So those are just a little tidbit thoughts from my end.
All right, we're gonna get Sam Feldman. You've been waiting patiently. You were in baseball, and now aren't you just working with like Indy pit crews now?
Yeah, no, now I'm working with primarily sports car, or well, I should say motorsport drivers of all, be it Indy, be it Formula Grids, be it sports cars. So you name it. And
What's their vertical jumps?
shit. Ask me if I care. Granted, we use it. It's a way to know if they're actually powerful, but does it really mean that much? God, no. At least I don't think it does.
So you still do those tests?
Well, I mean, if you're going to assess people, right, at least we can show them whether or not they make progress in the weight room. Leads into my perfect question, actually. Thanks. Why does the combine matter? Like, I mean, sure, I'm quipping as a joke when Tom Brady's back. Why does it matter? But seriously, does it? Like, maybe we see a few differences in what people can or can't do on the field, but if they can't play, who cares? Plus, if we're not going to test that stuff again, if we're not going to reassess it, then it's the baseline. And if teams aren't going to go do that stuff and see if their players are actually any better or worse, why does it really matter to begin with? I would think, sure, it's what we've always done, but
so you actually do vertical jump for motorsport racers?
I mean, we don't have for now we have a trial for a force plate where we can get power, but it's not like we have a force plate where we could use an IMTP and compare that to their brake power. So
okay.
Is that to see how forceful they are when they're sitting in when they're sitting in the car or something?
Yeah, when they stomp on that gas pedal.
Yeah, they can measure PSI there. So if we had a force plate, then we could measure at least how they do it standing and possibly seated with it. Wow. How they would do that by comparison, but that's how it's been done here before.
I hear that the heart rate can go up in motorsport racing. Do you do an aerobic test to kind of correlate with that?
So we'll get their VO2. So we have that. We can see also their heart rate.
Bike or running?
Running.
Running. Oh, running. Wow. That sucks.
A lot of guys actually do like to run and or bike. So it helps because that way we're giving them conditioning, but they also actually tend to enjoy it in some way, shape, or form. So that's useful. A lot of guys wear a Whoop. So as much as I think a lot of people would agree that Whoop may not be the best thing out there, at least it's a way to monitor and see just how well it is by comparison. So we're looking at that. I mean, that's more important data than how high they can jump. But at least if they're going to train, right? Like, okay, are we getting you better? We can show progress because that's what we're here to do. Can we make you a better driver? I'm going to go with, I highly, highly doubt that.
Well, that's a great example. Like obviously that's a perfect one where you're like, well, get in the car and let's see if you can drive. I don't care about your vertical jump.
Right. I mean, we have a sim here. So some of them like to use the sim, some of them don't. The more that I've talked to them, some actually will tell you that sims can create bad habits because it's different than being in a car.
Okay. Is performance in the sim indicative of their skill though?
Not necessarily, I don't think, from what they've said now. I think it somewhat depends on the sim compared to a car, because again, the different way you're feeling, how it bumps, the difference in, is the tire warm? Are you actually managing to get your tire warm well? So I think there's a lot to it that hasn't even scratched the surface yet, for instance. I think at least with this sport where Jim brought up the example of Tim Lincecum, here's the question of specialization, right? And how many bolts do we have? Well, Mark Pryor was the complete opposite of Lincecum and he still flamed out. So, how do we know from what age do they start till they end? Even in racing, how many times can they press the brake pedal at the right time as well? Does it matter? Or is it all of a sudden at some point you're going to become 45 years old and your reactions are just that much slower and now you're just that much worse no matter when you started by comparison? So from a specialization point, right? Like how much specialization is too much? How much is too little? Do we actually know? A lot of these guys, all they do from probably the age of somewhere between 8 and 12 is drive and don't play any other sports. A lot of them, once they get in a car, they don't end up getting out of it. I think very few are doing multiple sports, including racing, once they're growing up. I mean, sure, they're doing conditioning stuff, but they're not doing it necessarily as a form of, let me go to the track and see how my 400 is.
Okay, so I have a question for everybody here, and you can jump in whenever. I mean, is there anybody in this group who would have the balls to say to a group like, get rid of all these tests? This is a waste of freaking time. Like in that case, like if you're in motorsport, do you have the confidence to say like, why are we even doing this? Why are we doing that test aside from progress of the weight program, which really has no real value anyways either? So anybody have any thoughts on that? Is somebody going to actually just blow this up and say like, why are we actually doing any of this?
I asked that to my boss. We talk about it all the time. Now with IndyCar drivers, it is different. I would say they have to be able to have a lot of upper body power. They don't have power steering. Formula cars, you have power steering, so it's like turning a car. Where with IndyCar drivers, you're fighting all the same forces, but now your upper body better be strong enough to handle all the laps you're doing without power steering, turning one of the heaviest cars you've ever felt in your life.
I know. I mean, but for say NASCAR, like I used to watch Richard Petty when he got out of the bloody car. You're like, somebody's got to help this guy, like walk, or he looked like he was very frail and everything, but he could drive the crap out of a car. So yeah, it's very interesting. Does anybody else have any thoughts on why are we doing some of these tests? Is it just we're caught up in, the strength and conditioning industry is trying to self-validate?
I would say, just from my experience, sometimes boss got to have something to validate something. It's like besides like, even if they have performance, hey, they've done this on the track or done this in the field, it's like for some reason the boss still wants, I need to see these parameters. And I'm like, was this not good enough for you? So now me being out, to me, I'm like, I would question everything. Why are we doing it? What's the reason for it? Okay, if we want to do these things, why? And then how are we going to use it to program and plan? Because
professional ass covering.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, to keep my job, I got to show something. Like I know a guy, that's from Canada, that's in the NFL, and he was like, man, as long as I keep these guys healthy, that's all that matters. What I do with them in the weight room, it doesn't matter. They got to be able to play the game on the field. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just the way of like people got to show something. I think it's an ego. I think it's ego thing. Got to pump my chest on something.
Ryan, let's get you in on here. Your head looks perfectly round and not any bigger, so that's good.
I'm flipping hamburgers right now. So, but what I was going to say is for youth development and in my program with my own data, which is longitudinal for almost 2 decades, the tests really do help me. However, some of the tests like that people traditionally use, I don't find any value. So like when people talk about a vertical jump test in track and field, that didn't correlate at all to high jump performance, long jump performance, or anything. But the test that did matter the most is that almost to the person, every kid on a 30-meter fly, if they were the top in their group, typically were, at the top end of what we can produce in the state of Missouri. So that's a state qualifier, all state, school record holder. And then what was really curious, I guess not curious, but in the distance kids, even though they might not have the fastest flying 30, if you take their section of the distance kids, the fastest kids in my school history in the 800 also had a fastest flying 30 amongst the distance kids. So I think there's a lot of value. And I would think that, with Jimson and what even Dr. Bondarchuk, and I don't act as an expert on him, but I always found that the underload and overload right at the intensity and density and expectations of the work is probably the best indicator of preparedness. And so when I've built my program, like I know that if a girl's running in the low 50s at the beginning of the season for us in a 350, I know that she's going to be in within 2 seconds of that time by the end of the year. And then we time trial everybody as well. And, and part of it is for me with the testing is to categorize, okay, this is where your baseline talents lie. So let's slide you into this mailbox. And then as we compete and we see what your strengths and weaknesses are in actual competition, then we will adjust as we move forward. So I think there's value, but I also think, like, again, it is cover your butt for some of these folks. And again, who's the first person to typically get fired, will be strength and conditioning when it comes down to somebody's job being on the line.
Good point.
Or the assistant.
Anyways, Eric Kozlowski, you're sitting here listening to all this. You're an athletic trainer. Is there any value in any of this stuff as far as you're concerned in your job, like knowing what athletes tested at? And did they even show you that information at the academy?
Yeah, we share that with Matt McGettigan, and I think Rob's right. You got to have some sort of baseline to get back to. We've started using some of the trackers. I'm just blanking on the name right now that we use. The little orange bands go around your ankles, and we're able to figure out that once we get a guy back from an injury, you'll get them close to where they're ready to go back to practice, and they hit those numbers, and then they're at a fitness level for practice. But like Jim said, I agree 100%. I don't use the term bullets, but I use chips. Some athletes only have so many chips in them. And, again, the bottom line, you got to be able to prove it on the field, whatever that field may be. We see guys that don't test very well that come game day, they're the players and they're the ones. So I think I'll use that in the rehab thing. And there's such a big mental aspect in the rehab room. And I start just pumping my guys up like, hey, we're coming back from this ACL. We're going to be faster than everybody else. We win. We're working hard more than the other guys do. And I think the mental aspect helps those kind of kids come back and get back their normal level again. We've had pretty good luck with our ACLs and our shoulders returning to at least the same level of play, if not beyond it once they return.
Great input, Eric, as usual. Adrian, I want you to kind of offer your thoughts. You've been very active on the chat, but I want to hear it from your mouth. And what are your thoughts with what your role is in preparing athletes, whether it's track or football, and what you see when they actually hit the track or the field?
For me, it's honestly, I guess it depends on, like for track or actually for football, I was always taught if I don't see it on Sunday, I don't do it on Tuesday. I'm sure courtesy of, I'm sure you guys remember the gentleman, Kim Wood, the very first NFL strength coach. He was with the Cincinnati Bengals for like forever. He had guys, Tim Crummer, I'm sure his son, John, and I are still cool. Anyway, Kim, that's what he taught me. He said, if I don't see, why are these guys doing this ladders and all this other BS on Tuesday when you're not doing it on Sunday? And so I'd never forget that when he taught me this. And so like track wise, it's like, I use another example. I've seen parachutes, I've seen wickets, I've seen all this other BS toys that they buy, these high speed treadmills. And it's like, guys, none of this crap is actually on the track. What are you doing? What technique are you using? And I'll never forget those words. I'm like, what technique are you using? They will literally give me this blank stare, like, there's a sprinting technique? Seriously? And I'm like, what did your coach tell you? And I'm telling you, this was at USA's. And I'm like, well, what technique are you using? And I won't say the school, but the kid was like, wait, there's a sprinting technique I'm supposed to be using? I'm like, holy crap. And a lot of these kids are literally just running on pure raw talent. Like for me, I guess you could say technique trumps everything. And does it translate to the sport? I'm always going to subscribe like that. And it's worked so far and 0 injuries. So I think I'm gonna stick with that role.
If you don't see it on Sunday, don't do it on Tuesday. Good one. It keeps coming back to this idea that you have to have talent or skill in your specific sport, and then you kind of build it around that. That's what I seem to be hearing here. Is anybody else getting anything else out of this aside from that? And obviously there's work ethic and there's character and there's mental toughness and all that stuff. But Rob, what are your thoughts?
I got a question. Yeah, I'm just thinking, I have a question because we keep saying this. Kevin alluded to it a little bit earlier. I think, arguably, over the past couple of decades, our athletes are getting bigger, stronger, more powerful, faster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Regardless of the sport, if you look across the board, because more sports some sports are more violent than others, so to speak, why aren't injury rates going down significantly? We always say that, right? So we're going to get stronger, faster. We're going to prevent injuries, this, that. We're looking at workloads. I'm just throwing this out there. Why does the what do you guys think? Though performance in testing has improved, why aren't injury rates going down, regardless of the sport?
Yeah, 57 ACLs in the NFL. People are like, it's the turf. And then I looked at it. I talked to Rob about this. I looked at every field that it was played on. It's basically 50-50 grass to turf. And there's more turf fields.
Yeah, but you could talk about the NBA. Football is fairly violent. Let's look. I'm not saying the NBA is not violent because they kill each other under the boards. You could talk about baseball. You could talk about hockey. You could talk about the NBA. Injury rates don't appear to be going down as significantly as performance is going up based on the tests that we do. So I seriously don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. What do people think with better conditioning, better physical specimens? Why are our injury rates going up?
Here's a question, Rob. Is performance going up? Because if you look at GPS numbers on, say, an NFL field, they're not running faster every year. They're, so I don't know if, in NBA, they're better at shooting threes, that's for sure. But is performance actually going up too? I don't think it is.
Maybe it's not. So is that an illusion as well?
So I'll jump in real quick, and I will tell you that I think, from the bottom of my heart, I think it is a lack of conditions and preparation. We're very afraid to get injured from doing the necessary amount of work in terms of tempo, in terms of actual fitness, and the athletes are getting heavier, and so there is more momentum. I think the impacts are bigger on the bodies, both court to body in basketball, body to body in football. And I think when they cut all that preparation and training and they've gone to pitch counts with kids in baseball, we're trying to save people, which is nice, but by saving them, we might be increasing the chance of catastrophe later by not having the necessary preparation ready for them. And I think that is a very big problem. And I'll leave it there.
Could it also be because there's still a lot of silos taking place as far as working together, right? You have all this data, right? You give it to the athletic trainer or vice versa. You might say, hey, this is how we're doing things, this is how we're looking at it, but the other person saying, no, we should do it this way. And so therefore nothing really happens. So it's like, I would say, unless everyone's seeing and looking at how they're doing things as a unit and truly working together, can you really improve things? Because we know, right? Sport coaches have issues with, the training room and physicians and doctors. Then you have your private sector people putting hands on things. And I think that's a big issue.
Well, thanks for everybody jumping on. I'll get Rob to reiterate here, but I think it just always seems to come down to this individualization, understanding, the context of the athletes you're working with, pulling from experience from the past and customizing. And even from a testing point of view, you can't just look at test numbers and take them at face value. You have to pull everything together and go, okay, this person's an individual and I'm going to treat them in a way that enhances their individual characteristics and qualities. Would you say so, Rob?
Yeah, I would agree. What are their deficits? What are their assets? And how do they correlate to their sport of participation? I agree with just about everything that's been said on this call. I appreciate everybody being on. That's what it comes down to, the bottom line. And I'm just repeating myself. Can they play? Can they run? Can they play?
And then work back from there, essentially.
Well, I think when you're in a setting that if we're going to test, right, whether the tests are valid or not, as we're having this conversation, there are going to be certain standards of the sport of participation that your athlete's going to have to meet via those tests, right? Are they fast enough? Can they jump high enough? Can they lift enough weight? And once they meet the standards of the game, then they're going to go in a rehab setting. They're going to go back to return to play, and in a strength and conditioning setting, you're hopefully have prepared them and they're going to be, physically prepared to play, but they still have to demonstrate the ability to do the job consistently, So,
yeah. Well,
I'm not sure if I answer your question.
Yeah. I think so. Well, I mean, after hearing about Sam's experience, I'm going to take my jump mat down to the DMV and test everybody before their driver's test. You know, so see
Gonna
what
buy a convertible.
Awesome. Well,
I was,
thanks.
I was on a, sorry, I just
Go
threw this
ahead.
in. I was on, Jimson and I were on a call earlier this week, and Randy Huntington was on it. So Randy does a lot of work with Chinese printers. So if anyone doesn't know, Sue, the Chinese kid this year at the Olympics, ran the fastest 60 ever recorded inside 100 meters, 6:29 electric for 60 meters, which was about 66 yards. And he's using a lot of the Exogen product now, kind of this external weighted loading, you know, and I think the products are probably getting better. We're just starting to get a couple of samples here now and play around with them. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that stuff, but
What is it exactly? Can you describe it?
you know, like the whole idea of actually wearing the resistance, right? So like a weighted vest, but the weight is distributed through smaller pellets. So it's more, you don't have like a big center mass, you know, it's distributed around the body. And then, and so you can, they've got like half tights, they've got, so you can pretty much put this weight anywhere you want.
Do you think he overdid it in that semi and he just blew his CNS and everything for the final?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics, but historically, you know, yes, you would say that, right?
Yeah.
You know, yeah, like you have to be, I think that in track field in general, in most cases, that people forget, right? The level of mental stimulation at a major championships is super high, and then they're tapered physically, right? So, and then they usually come into a stadium there where it's calm. There'll be no headwind at a minimum, and the track surfaces are really fast, and so it's easy to drop like a really fast first round time or second round time, right? Because you're ready, you're unloaded, but then trying to run 3 of them in a much more compressed period of time can be more difficult, especially with people around you. It's a different skill in and of itself. You got pressure.
Yeah, because his acceleration, even in the final, was not there. He didn't have anything left. So
yeah.
Randy confirmed that he blew a gasket. He could say, because he talked to him right afterwards, and he said Sue was like, "I'm tired." So yeah, he was toast.
Yeah. Oh, still impressive though. But yeah, I have to look into that stuff. I mean, I always, even Al, I remember Rob, we were talking about doing all our drilling with some sort of weighted vest and distribute.
There's an Australian guy at AUT, researcher to technology. I'll send you offline.
Okay.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to hear about that, I'll pass it on as well. Thanks, Kevin. Great. Thank you very much for jumping on, everyone, and hope to see you again next time we do one. I'm searching for good topics. I don't just want to pull everybody together if we're just gonna, try to make up something. But yeah, thank you very much. This was useful.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Good night.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.